Up in the mountains of Lesotho, the Basotho people that live there are considered an unreached people group. They're less than 2% followers of Jesus.
The travel can be daunting. It's a country in the middle of the country of South Africa, and it's very remote, it's very elevated. It's a 15-hour flight, a 10-hour drive.
So the roads out of South Africa are full of potholes, and once you get into Lesotho, it's all four-wheel drive. It's very off-road, very bumpy.
Until we actually experienced it, we didn't realize how remote it actually was.
So the first time going into the valley is a huge culture shock. They live out in the middle of nowhere with no electricity, no running water. They have to grow their own food.
Hoping the rain comes and they have a good harvest, because without that, they have no access to food, no access to any source of income. So it's a difficult life.
There's not very many churches they have access to. If they do want to go to church, most of the people live in a place where it's a 4.5-hour walk either direction to the nearest church.
We were praying about where God was specifically calling us. We didn't want to do, popcorn missions. We wanted to develop relationships where we could, over years, regardless of, who was leading on staff or in leadership positions, it was a calling to the people, to that land.
So part of their culture is they go through a cultural training school, and that is usually led by the Sangomas. And a lot of these Sangomas teach witchcraft.
In their culture, they wear these charms that they get from the witch doctor that they believe are going to protect them or do something for them. And when you see them come to faith and they take those charms off, and you know that that's such a big deal for them and that they are really turning from that life to Jesus, has been just incredible.
It was 2013, I received an email about a visiting trip to Lesotho with 10 other individuals. I had never even heard of Lesotho, did not know where it was located. He said it was a trip to Africa.
So when the Flora family first moved to Lesotho, a few years later, River Oak got connected. They were using and utilizing short-term teams so well and so effectively that it was something that drew us in. We wanted to be a part of this work.
And one of the first men I met through that when we got to Lesotho was a man by the name of Jim Flora. Jim and Teresa Flora. Jim is with the Lord now. And so when we went, Jim was responsible for taking care of us for 10 days, basically up in the mountains. And I got to see the unique calling that God had upon his life. But then as I got to see some of those same qualities and giftings that I saw in Jim Flora, very uniquely in Kyle.
I noticed my calling into ministry when I came to faith, and at the same time that I put my faith in him, I felt the Holy Spirit tell me that there are people all around the world that have never heard the gospel, so go and tell them about Jesus.
When he was in 11th grade, he changed schools. I can remember when he was there, a missionary coming, and just how excited he was when he came home that day. And I can remember thinking,
I remember connecting with the Flora family and saying, hey, can I come and live with you for a semester?
At that point, it was clear to us. Whether it was Lesotho, we assumed it would be, but definitely would be the mission field.
It was neat to see again a young man who really desired to be where God was calling him to be.
When Kyle and Kim started dating, I can remember us saying whether they ended up together or not ended up together, they would both end up in missions. I believe Kim is called to missions as much as Kyle.
On probably our second date, Kyle was driving and had shared with me that he felt that the Lord was calling him to take the gospel to people who had never heard it before.
And I remember telling this story to her, and I looked over and she just kind of nodded and said, that's really cool, and didn't say anything else. And I thought, wow, that fell flat.
I remember him saying later that he was kind of disappointed because the way that I reacted was just kind of like, oh, that's great. And he was disappointed because he had never told anybody and it was kind of a big deal for him. But I knew on the inside that I was thinking, oh, we'll probably get married. And you can't say that out loud.
So I was kind of met with a flat response, but all the while the Lord was using this experience in our lives.
It's been a cool thing to see what God has done in Kyle's life and in Kim's life and in preparing her time in India, again, to see what God was doing in them separately to prepare them for where we are today and what is to come.
Shortly after Jim Flora passed, we had traveled to Missouri for his service, and it kind of started to stir while we were there, but really shortly after that, I think both of us realized individually that we started to feel like the Lord was calling us, until one day we just kind of had that conversation about it.
We both looked at each other one day and just said, like, are you feeling the same thing? And after just talking through it and praying about it for a long time, the Lord has just confirmed over and over and over again that this is where we're supposed to be.
And then that's where the February 2022 trip kind of came out of those conversations of seeing, really we think that the Lord is calling us to go and be there full time.
They were there for about 2.5 weeks before I showed up with my nephew, and we got there and they were at home.
So Lily's personality is she just kind of jumps right in.
Seeing pictures of Lily in front of those kids just blesses your heart.
Lily loved it. I mean,
She thrives in it.
she just loves people.
One of our first days there in a village, there was a little girl about her age, and while we spent time in this village sharing the gospel, they played together for probably 3 hours, and they knew 2 of the same words.
To see the kids going around playing with the local Lesotho kids was just amazing. It was like they'd known them forever. To see Kyle and Kim working together while teaching just reminded me of what I've seen in other missionaries who've been on the field for years. You could tell that this is where God called them. You could tell this is where God's called us as a church to send them.
What am I most excited about? I think probably just to feel like we're finally doing like what he's called us to for so long. That's really exciting.